So I think the first thing I want to talk about here is I think last time I talked about the inbox and stuff like that, but I added this feature that's really cool, which is called a D3 graph. And basically what you can see here is that you can actually see the other entries that are related to it, like in the space, but like visually. And what's really cool about this is that it does the entry comment model. So you can see here that the yellow ones are the comments, and then the purples are what they point to, the greens are the relationships. Sometimes the dragon gets weird. Uh, and then you can kind of like click this, and then you can go to the entry, which is cool. This is kind of what I wanted comments to feel like. It's still buggy. I think that you can see here there's like repeats that are kind of like floating on the outside here. I don't know why. Sometimes like it'll load the image in the wrong spot. Um, it's kind of crowded, so sometimes it's like kind of hard to click the like comment or entry that you're this. So yeah, I don't fucking know, but whatever. I think that it's a really great direction because it adds so much visual appeal to the application. And I didn't really have a plan for today. I think last time I had like that Google Doc set up to read about Hunter x Hunter and kind of just vibe for an hour. I could go through the inbox and kind of just start there. We could start by doing random, or we could give a new thing. Um, but actually, yeah, let's go random. Let's just see. Let's jump to a random entry and just see where we land. So this one already has comments. So one of the things that I've been doing is kind of trying to use the random button to jump around, and then sometimes I'll look for something in here, uh, and then kind of like go here and see if it has a comment or a link. So the explore option is gone. I don't know what that is. The explore option. Oh, so this is like a Google search. So uh, you can't Google search. Google search from docs anymore? Question mark. So like you used to be able to uh search Google Docs, like search Google from Google Docs. And apparently that's not the is the case no more. Um so yeah, this is another example. Sometimes it'll add like an empty comment. I think this is one of the problems with like programming something like this is that like even though I'm very confident in the overall feeling of the user experience in terms of like the novelty that it provides and the utility, there's so many kind of like pernicious small bugs that I haven't felt adequately motivated to kind of like address and I've just kind of like put up with. It's almost like when you have like a dirty room, for example. So right now I'm in a green screen, but if you could see my room or my desk, it's like kind of cluttered. Like it's not completely clear. Sometimes it is clear, and then I like kind of like start putting stuff on it one by one, and then it becomes a little bit more cluttered and more cluttered and more cluttered. And this is a good example of like the desk being in a cluttered space. But because of the green screen, you don't really notice the clutter. And I think software is kind of similar sometimes where you'll be coding something and then you'll run into a bug and then you just won't have enough kind of like, I don't know, energy to kind of like fix it at that exact moment. So then you just kind of like let it slide and then you don't see it for a while and then you see it again and you're like, ah, damn, I meant to fix that. And then you do something else again. So this is kind of how this works. Not that I'm planning on doing any of this coding on stream. I've actually split my day into coding days and non-coding days, which I could talk about. So let's do this real quick. So let's make a new entry called coding days versus non-coding days. I think that's probably more interesting than whatever Google Docs has to offer us anyway. So, or those Google Docs entries. So let's see what it pulls up from the relationships in my system. Ooh, yeah. So we have this entry from, I wonder if I could just open it in a new tab. Does that work? Oh, it does work. I wrote this blog post about a month ago that was talking about um, this kind of weird anxiety, guilty feeling that you get when you haven't coded in a while, especially when you've been coding a lot. And it's kind of like hard to switch that part of your brain off. What's this? This is the in spite of versus like making it fit into your routine. This is another time management blog post that I wrote about time blocking. Um, this is kind of the idea of reinventing the wheel, but particularly when it pertains to um, the you writing notes versus like you doing something for the person who doesn't exist yet, which is in theory kind of what an investment is, right? And then uh, breaking down single notes into smaller ones. So this is another thing from a book. So the idea behind coding days, let's just talk about this real quick. So the idea behind coding days is that a coding day basically gives you um, the ability, or setting static coding days gives you the ability to kind of decide if you are going to uh, basically write code days versus not writing code days. And I think that that's really good for solo developers in particular who are working on an app that they're dog fooding, because it gives you space to see your app for a full day or 2 days from the perspective of an end user and not the developer. And that allows you to really fill up your project management kind of workflows to be able to see what you have to do later. So actually here, let's do this real quick. I want to show this. So if I do the double bracket, and this is a wiki links form of linking, this actually works here too. So this will actually be used to generate new things at the graph so we can see scheduling and due dates versus due dates. So here, let's leave that as a comment that we just said. The advantage of having regulated coding days during your week is that during the non coding days, you get to see your app as an end user for a full day and not as a developer. The advantage of having regulated code days during your week is that during the non coding days, you get to see. So then sometimes I like to do the links here too. You get to see your app as an end user for a full day and not as a developer. Hells yeah. Okay. So we get to see here that this is now kind of getting crazy, right? Our graph is building on itself, which is cool. This is exactly what we want to see. So now, is there what else do I want to say about non-coding days? Um, so I think one thing that I've noticed about non-coding days is that I think lazier is the wrong term, but my focus becomes really diffuse really quickly, because when I look forward to coding days, there's like this intensity that's attached to coding where you feel kind of like, okay, I'm going to be writing code and it's going to take full sustained effort. But if you want to accomplish some deep work on the days where you're not doing that full sustained effort for coding, finding something else that scratches that itch is really not that trivial. And I mean, like, I've done stuff in the past with writing in particular, but I only really write for my Sunday newsletter. And even then, I just restarted that. So it's like I should be working on that today, but after this, I'll be going to a drawing class. Um, but it's like one of those things that I think that the uh, the delta almost of the intensity of a coding day and the lack of intensity of a non-coding day is really jarring. And I think that that's something that's actually a downside of this, but it's also, gives you time to reflect on perhaps how to spend your time better, right? There is a jarring difference between the coding days and the non-coding days in terms of the intensity of focus applied during deep work sessions. A jarring difference. There is a jarring difference between the coding days and non-coding days in terms of the intensity of focus applied during deep work sessions is something that I would bracket here. And then maybe we can find one more comment to put in here. So one thing that I need to do is also add it so that the links here, because like right now the links just work. This red dot here is this link right here. But I also want it to happen from the comments. So I want this to have its own red dots that shoot out to its own green relationships and stuff like that. Z2, but you'll see actually that we're starting to run into the end of our quote unquote relationships. Like this comment only has two, but this comment has, wait, this comment only has one. That's cool. Basically, the idea is that like you won't always have stuff in your system, uh, and it should only match on the relationships that you have and not lie to you about the relationships that you don't. Oh. It's a very like Jekyll and Hyde situation. Coding days versus non-coding days. This creates a very Jekyll and Hyde situation where you have to find another part of your work life that is equally as important to you, but invokes a different set of skills. I know I won't necessarily leave this as a comment, but my closest proxy for this is probably like doctors when they have to do switch between paperwork brain and patient brain. Uh, Doctors have to switch between paperwork brain and patient brain, which is paying attention to two different audiences and understanding how to be the most effective at both of those jobs. So basically, you can have like a lot of jobs within a job. And I think programming is a lot like that too, because you have to be really on top of your game as a coder in the sense of like kind of like figuring out what you're trying to accomplish in actual programming with Rust or JavaScript or Python or whatever, in terms of like what do the functions look like, why am I using this database stack, what are my try catch loops doing, or try catch statements, and what am I how many for loops are being activated, should I refactor this into another function. All of those are kind of like actual kind of programming questions, but then you have like the kind of meta programming questions, which is like, does this feel good to use? What feels bad about it? What are the bugs that are like actually worth squashing versus like what would just cause more bugs down the line? So you have to have a kind of more holistic forest for the trees approach. And I don't think all jobs are like this. I think jobs that lean creative and pragmatic tend to have to do both of these, which is again why I brought up doctors, or another good example is just the other engineering fields. Law is another good example where you have something that you're basing your, that's not completely subjective, right? I think like music, for example, has its objective moments, but is largely subjective. There's a lot of music that people listen to willingly that I think sounds like shit. And they probably think the exact same thing about the music that I listen to. So it's very subjective, but there are some things that need to be interpreted fairly. For example, like the law, or making a correct medical diagnosis, or creating a better system overall, and for a programming system. So those things are pretty objective. So you need to have that objectivity uh, viewpoint, but you also need to be able to vantage point, I suppose. But you also need to be able to holistically say like, okay, no, this is why this isn't working or working. Here's a good example of this. I have to hit the save all changes button when I'm saving the changes. Like the comments, even though they loaded into the graph, aren't actually committed to the system until you hit that save all changes button, which is pretty annoying. But anyway, so this is kind of where we got. So we saw that this is kind of how I've been doing again comments and stuff like this too, is that like I like to see the graph, and then I can kind of like either jump to another node from here, or I can go completely random or whatever. But the comments that we left behind for coding days versus non-coding days are the advantage of having regulated coding days is that you get to see your app as an end user, which is pretty cool. But then this also causes this jarring difference between the non-coding days of intensity of focus, which can create this kind of Jekyll and Hyde situation where you have to find another part of your work life that's equally important to you, but involves a different set of skills, which is actually pretty hard to do. Especially if you really like one component of your job and you don't like another component of your job. And then doctors are good examples, and lawyers and stuff like that, having to switch between paperwork brain and patient brain to pay attention to the different audiences while having to understand how to be effective at both of those jobs. Okay, my bit rate just dropped again, but it's climbing back up again slowly. Yeah, this fucking bit rate, bro, I'm gonna lose my shit. So let's just go to this one. So again, I think that the overall kind of drawn process of this experience, I think, looks something along the lines of this, where um, you start out with the world, and then from the world you get. And I was just thinking about this morning, actually, so this is pretty fresh at the top of my mind. So the world will present you, let's say, these are like information blocks. So you have information blocks here, fucking another information block here, and one more. And then let's draw this arrow, make it black, and then we'll call this information blocks. So basically, these information blocks come from the world, right? Like the world is just producing these information blocks. This is like sounds, noises, smells, events, just things that are happening. And then there is you, which is a filter. How do I draw a filter? This is a diamond. Let's go here. Let's try this. Filter. Oh no, this creates a diagram. I'm looking for. What's this? I just want to draw a fucking triangle. I like Excalibraw's vibe, but sometimes they're still just really off about it, you know? Presentation, items. Okay, let's go here. Let's get more shapes in this bitch. 3D shapes. Um, Basic shapes. There we go. Okay. So this is, I think, basically you as a filter. So basically, you'll decide what information is kind of important to you, but you won't have a kind of necessarily thesis from the top down. You might have some top down strategies that have worked in the past in order to pay attention to something, largely stimulus driven. I think if you talk to somebody who has like ADHD, for example, they're very stimulus driven. But if you talk to someone who doesn't have ADHD, they're a little bit less stimulus driven, but they're still stimulus driven. It's just that the level of the intensity of the stimulus and how quickly your attention kind of like shifts to it. Anyway, so then let's say that we take this red one here. And then we have this, and then we can store this. Let's copy this because I'm tired of doing the arrow thing. And then this is literally an entry into YCB. It's just that simple, folks. We basically have a entry is that it's basically the ability to kind of like discern from a set of data from the world, turn it through you as a filter by deciding which is important, recreating it into an entry, and then stored, let's say it's stored into inbox. And then we have later. So like, is there like a clock or something? Objects, Christmas essentials, Picasso line drawings, medicine. Let's go total downloads. Software architecture, system design, stick figures. Sure, I think some stick figures would be helpful. Um, Forms. Sure. Awesome icons. Yeah, sure. Awesome. Here we go. Okay, so then time passes. And then do we have anything for comments? Hmm. These are all like let's just do this and then add comment and then uh basically put it back out into the world. So I think this has been said a number of times, like, in terms of like how people kind of perceive of the Zettelkasten way of doing things. Hold on. You as an amplifier. But I think, I mean, this is kind of just how information works, right? So then like you basically take your information block, then you mutate it by adding comments into something new. So maybe it's this guy. Holding the entry and comment. This is basically a conjecture. So if you've ever read Beginning of Infinity, conjecture. Well, so yeah, so the world can present information blocks, which I am arguing here are kind of discrete bundles, units of information. I guess you could kind of nitpick whether you think information is continuous or discrete, but I think broadly speaking, there are discrete elements that are the signals within the continuous noise of information transfer, of like, oh, it was warm but now it's really hot and I'm going to where, get under the shade or something like that. Like there's a threshold for some information, and then there's just some information that's just kind of static, which is kind of just like reading the Bible's 10 commandments over and over again or something. So then we have our information blocks, which can come in through any of our senses. Then we have a filter basically in our attention seeking to decide what is the important thing to pay attention to. Then we take that important thing that we pay attention to and we literally just store it directly in our comment base. This is basically extracting the part of the information from the stream that you think is actually helpful. Then you let some time go by. Um, this could be like seconds, or this could be weeks. But basically, you come at it from a different perspective later, and the idea has tempered itself into something different, the information. And then basically, you use the entry comment model, which, by the way, I'm trying to decide if I want to call it the entry comment model. I was thinking like the Adams entry comment model, or I was thinking about the Adams common base architecture. Because I think that I watched this video a few days ago from Johnny Harris about Trump and how he put his name all over everything as like a recognition thing. And then I was like, oh yeah, I guess like people don't really put their names on things, or it seems kind of like, I don't know, shitty or stupid to put your name on something if you think it's going to go well. But then I thought like it's called the von Neumann architecture and like a Turing machine. Like those are just those guys' last names. So why can't I say the Adams common base architecture? Like, even if I do call it personal library science and the company is your common base, like, shouldn't I be able to say the Adams common entry model or the Adams common base architecture? And I think if I start with the common base architecture, then the entry comment model is a part of that. So it's like I kind of want to like bubble up the tree. Uh, but I can't be like Adams library science. That doesn't make any sense. But I could say personal library science, and then a school of it is the Adams common base architecture. Anyway, so then you add your own comment, which is your own basically understanding of that thing, or kind of linking, highlighting that we've been showing. And then that basically is what we call a conjecture, which is something that is like a new thing for the world to deal with. And then you amplify your conjecture through your voice or through your platform. Which, by the way, I watched a OTV versus OTK does like a Halloween fear pong thing, and I'm glad that like I have two minds on it. My first mind is that it's really stupid how we have adults acting like 15-year-olds on camera and making millions of dollars. I think that's a bad idea. I think that we're enforcing some pretty bad habits in both the creators themselves and the audiences that they quote unquote serve, because we basically reward them for being dramatic middle schoolers, which I guess if they're good at it, as a skill, as an entertainer, and people like reality TV and stuff like that. But it's just the removal of the boundary between the individual and their work is a lot less clear with live streaming, and especially when it comes to just them doing these stupid things. And it's like, are you stupid and do these stupid things, or are you just doing these stupid things for the camera? In which case you should probably be more clear about that. And I think that like there's like there's just this tragedy of the commons push towards having streamers be the stupidest versions of themselves, which is really unfortunate, because I'm sure that they're all smart, well-adjusted people. I mean, they have to be able to get that successful. And I do think that streamers are obviously very talented at the games that they play too, and they have to balance being a gamer and an entertainer. So I'm not poo-pooing on them. I'm just kind of saying that it's ridiculous that like, we've ended up in a world where the amplification is the most important part of this pipeline, as opposed to our own independent understanding of something. Like there's so many interesting things that are happening in the world that are basically kind of uh only really care about like if you got ratioed. Like this, the bottom here is where like the ratios happen on like Twitter and stuff like that. And that's where people spend all of their time, because they think that that's the thing that's the most important. Anyway, so then you as an amplifier for your idea goes back out into the world, and then this cycle starts anew. I wonder if I can do like an arrow that's curved. Oh, I can. Hell yeah. Boom. Escape. Yeah. So basically the idea is that you start off with the world. You the world is producing these information blocks. You filter these information blocks, which again you can have a different filter than me. So I might think that this one is important, and you might think that this one's important because we're different people. And then that's stored basically directly into your common base. Goes into your inbox first. If you aren't dealing with it, it just kind of gets put into a bucket. Sometime later, seconds or hours or weeks, you add your own commentary to it, which gives it its own kind of unique new shape, which is kind of this thing here, which is a conjecture. Depending on how bold the conjecture is or dissimilar, it creates new things from it. But some are just kind of rehashings of things that people have already heard, which is sometimes why you'll kind of get frustrated when you hear the 50th different kind of like TikTok video of somebody doing the exact same trend. But that's also why it's so comfortable to watch because you know exactly what's going to happen. So your brain has this kind of balance of here's a new person doing the same thing. And that's a nice little comfortable place for the brain to be because it's like I don't have to try that hard to think about a brand new thing, but I also am getting a new face. So it's kind of satisfying both the novelty and the familiarity aspects of your brain. Then finally, yeah, we have the amplification. We go back out into the world and make new information blocks. What does this have to do with this? So this is kind of, you know, where we're at with kind of like these graphs, right? So these graphs can expand basically based on their nearest neighbors. So this blue thing here is the entry itself, and these green ones are the neighbors that are closest or furthest to it. And you can't really tell the distance of these arrows, but they are technically longer or shorter based on how close they are in space to this one. So, you know, for example, this is about participation in a community, people being disparaging of your writing and leaving bad comments, and how this could make you feel with your ideas. Uh, but it says that publishing is pretty much always worth it because even though you might get shit on the internet, it will always give you some more information to work with if you care about the process. So you can see that this is also about writing. Um, then you can see that this one is ideas that come hidden from view, meaning is created in community. This is again sharing your writing. As you spend time working, you'll notice that there's things that are self-referential, yada yada yada, and self-reference is a form of writing. So you can see how all of these are kind of like related to the topic at hand versus like the one that we were last looking at about coding days versus non-coding days. A lot of the stuff in the graph here, once it loads, was stuff about like scheduling software, and making kind of like YouTube videos versus like coding, and then kind of like how do you find your time with your schedule for slowness, and then kind of like links to, you know, being, um, you know, having two different audiences and kind of like turn them into logical throughput. So let's just keep going here. I'll probably stop at like 350, 345, 350. So about 5 to 10 more minutes. So sometimes if I don't have a comment at the top of my head, I like to just use the links as underlines. So basically I'll like read this and I'll say, okay, so participation, readers are often dismissive of your work, even a seemingly seen. Yeah, this is so true. uh, there's so much fucking craziness in PKM and drama, weirdly. A lot of drama in the personal knowledge management space. And I think it's because of how personality driven it can become through the attachment that people have to their note taking system of choice. Like they'll develop an attachment to Obsidian or to Rome or to Notion, and then they'll just like defend it to the death. Um, which I get. I mean, I used to be a huge Obsidian user, and until the community kind of, in its own way, kind of chased me out. Uh, Not like fucking fully, pitchfork, but it did feel like the work that I had done for the community was going largely unrewarded, and if anything, cost me more effort and time. So I was like, nah, fuck this, I'm out. Um, Although publishing may not feel rewarding, it'll always be informative. So one of the advantages of the links thing too is that because it's just searching the link itself, it's actually pulling up different data. So you can see readers if you find them being dismissive of your work, right? So then this is going to be the great note abyss, which is kind of like relevance. A lot of the stuff in here is going to be kind of like loosely connected from this one book because whatever. But it's also what's really cool is that because it's just it starts with the entry and kind of like expands outward. So the stuff that sometimes would be matching for that is kind of uh yeah, the thoughts that other can read would be matched on the entry, so it wouldn't match here, for example, which is why this only gets 3 instead of getting 5. Because I set it to get 5 neighbors. New ideas will inevitably come to mind. Convert them into main notes. Cool. So we're going to save this. And like I said, this is kind of like a good way to just kind of expand the space of the thing without actually connecting it to something. We're lowering the inbox a little bit. Let's keep going. I'll try to get through like 3 more just to make the point real quick. So, like Lumen, you'll also import notes that at the time felt extraordinary, fall into the great note abyss. This isn't a failure as long as you're regularly establishing relationships. Uh, not finding notes is an indication of its relevancy. So again, I don't really have a idea right now that's kind of jumping out at me. So I just kind of like go through and do the underlining, progressive summarization, wiki notes, whatever you want to call it. So I like this at the time of importation falls into the great note abyss. Um, as long as you are regularly establishing relationships, not finding notes is an indication that their idea was not interesting or relevant as you thought it would be. So I think that that's kind of interesting and true. Where it's like again this idea of you don't need to like some things just like I think that a system like mine is actually really interesting because it actually doesn't really allow you to forget in a lot of ways. Like for example, this was added October 11th, which is at the time of this recording of this stream, like 20 some days ago. So you're constantly being reminded of things that you've saved in the past, for better or for worse. And I think that, because of the flexibility of linking, adding new comments that basically can kind of clarify your thinking on something later and deleting, that gives you an out. But it is kind of interesting to see how the human biological brain just automatically determines that something shouldn't be captured anymore or kept. So this is I like this. So this is what I'll use the star button for. So the star button is again to be able to take an entry and then basically store it without having to search for it, which is cool. So the you that's looking at your notes today isn't the same you that created them and will not be the same you that's looking 5 years from now. You'll have grown, have been introduced to new ideas and forgotten old ones. Your future self will benefit from having quality information. If you take a few minutes just to add useful information, uh, you'll save yourself hours from reinventing the wheel. You don't need to engage with every aspect. Scan for what's most relevant and leave the rest behind. So again, this is a really good example of why the entry comment model works so well, because it kind of serves as like a Git history if you've ever used programming, in the sense that like you don't need to um, it's about your future self having quality information and then having a chain to see how you got back to a particular line of thinking. The advantage of the entry slash comment model is that it gives you the ability to have a linear history of how you thought about something that is non-destructive. Hell yeah. I love it when it makes the little squares. An entry comes to life from the comments. Don't be overprotective of your main notes. yada 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 yada. So we're gonna save that. Again, this part takes the longest, probably. Let's do one more, and then we'll get out of here. Maybe let's go to a random place again. See where we end up. Find a random one that doesn't have comments. So this is actually a very extensive graph about Twitch streamers who spend years broadcasting to no one, fucking vibing. This is hiatus x hiatus, which is basically the idea that you don't need to do something every day to be good at it. This is luck. This is frustrated streaming. Sure. This is clips. Nobody watches 4 hours. Uh-huh. And is it worth? Yep. But I mean, again, we're looking for something that we can take out of our inbox. Okay, we got another one. If we go random one more time, I get a comment. Okay, cool. So now we have like just a relationship node, or just maybe a basic kind of node is maybe what we can refer to it as. So it says pick a note from your stack and give it a numeric ID, and then see what happens from there. So what do we have around here? So we have the work of breaking down notes, the single idea, hub note. So we're still doing Zettelkasten and stuff, but that's fine. Let's say that like uh the task of the note cards was basically a preface to computer generated IDs, which was a preface to vector embedding space. The note card ID space was a preface to computer uniquely generated ID space, which was a preface to vector embedding space. Embedding. And I do think that this is kind of like, again, like what you're seeing here is that like we don't really need to know the IDs, because the IDs kind of like find each other through the vector numbers having their own kind of ID. But it's cool to think about these objects kind of evolving over time. And again, one of the reasons that I was actually like, oh, maybe the atoms common base architecture makes sense here is because I was like, I'd be able to kind of freeze it in time. And as the common base architectures continue to evolve and people discover new strategies and stuff like that, they can move on from the atoms common base architecture, the ACA, and kind of like go somewhere else with it. But anyway, I think I'm just going to stop here. A, because again, like that's the pretty much the end of the office hour. B, it was so frustrating dealing with the fucking uh, bit rate. And C, we got some pretty good drawing and talking in, particularly about the information blocks in the real world, as well as the we got some good entry comment graph stuff going. So I think, yeah, I'm gonna stop here and see you later. Bye.